The chamber was packed, not just with lawmakers and aides, but with something heavier: tension. You could feel it pressing against your chest like a weight. The joint hearing had never happened before. Congress and the Supreme Court facing each other under the same dome. Cameras rolled. America watched. Chief Justice John Roberts sat tall, his black robe smooth, his hands folded. He looked calm. But the storm was coming. The hearing was meant to address recent rulings, ones that had left entire communities shattered. Decisions that denied reproductive rights, shielded billionaires from taxes, and allowed gerrymandering that silenced thousands of voices. People outside were protesting in wheelchairs, in tears, holding photos of lost sons and daughters. And inside, most lawmakers tiptoed, but not Jasmine Crockett. She had sat still for hours, her eyes never leaving Roberts. She wasn't angry, not yet, just quiet, focused, like someone waiting for a beat that hadn't dropped. Then, in the middle of a senator's soft-spoken defense of judicial integrity, Crockett whispered something to her aide. Her microphone blinked red. She was about to speak. The silence was already breaking, and so was the illusion of untouchable power. "Chief Justice," Jasmine Crockett said calmly, her voice steady like the Mississippi at dawn. "You wear that robe like it's a shield for corruption." A gasp, not from one person, from the whole room. Even the cameras seemed to pause. Roberts blinked but said nothing. Crockett didn't flinch. She wasn't grandstanding. She didn't raise her voice. But her words cut deeper than any scream ever could. "You hide behind tradition, but tradition doesn't feed a child whose school lost funding because of your ruling. It doesn't save a black teenager sentenced to die by a judge you empowered. It doesn't bring back Breonna Taylor." She looked him in the eye. "Your silence has consequences." Reporters scrambled for quotes. Lawmakers stared at their shoes. Even seasoned senators looked like they might cry. Because what she said wasn't just true, it was real. She told the story of a Texas mother whose child was denied life-saving surgery because of a ruling that gave insurance companies more power. She read the name of every person who had been executed in the last year because the court denied last-minute appeals. And Roberts just sat there, but the room no longer belonged to him. As the weight of Jasmine's words settled over the chamber, a rustling sound came from the public gallery above. A woman stood, gray hoodie, trembling hands, holding a framed photo. Security moved to stop her, but Jasmine turned, lifted a hand and said gently, "Let her speak." The woman's voice cracked. "My son's name was Elijah." She held up the picture. A young boy, laughing, missing his front teeth. He was 9, wrong place, wrong time, shot by a cop who said he felt threatened. The state refused to prosecute, and when we tried to sue, your court ruled the officer had qualified immunity. Silence. "I begged for justice," she sobbed. "You gave him protection." Jasmine turned back to Roberts. "You say the court is neutral, but it's only neutral to power. To pain, it's deaf." The mother began to cry. So did others. Reporters, a congressman. Even an intern sitting in the corner wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Jasmine walked up the aisle and embraced the woman. Not for the cameras, for her. "We will speak for them," she whispered. This wasn't politics anymore. It was something far more sacred. Justice was no longer just an idea. It was a promise. When the mother left the chamber, still clutching her son's photo, no one dared speak. Even Chief Justice Roberts looked briefly toward the ceiling, as if hoping for divine words to say. But Jasmine Crockett didn't sit down. She turned and pointed at the one empty chair in the chamber. "You see that?" she asked, her voice low, trembling with something deeper than rage. "Memory. That was supposed to be filled by Congressman Davis. He died last week. Heart failure, they say. But he called me before he passed. The room froze again. He said he was tired of watching justice rot while men in robes pretend not to notice. She paused, looking around. He told me, "I'm not dying of age, Jasmine. I'm dying of disappointment." Gasps. Someone sobbed quietly in the third row. His last vote was to support this hearing, to question the very foundation of a court that protects the rich and leaves the rest of us begging. Crockett sat down slowly, and for the first time, even the reporters didn't know what to write. Because this wasn't a story anymore. It was grief, and truth, and something sacred being torn apart. After the hearing recessed for lunch, the hallways buzzed with hushed voices. Some senators walked quickly, eyes averted. Aides cried in corners. Others stood frozen, staring at their phones, watching Jasmine Crockett's words loop across every social feed in America. Inside a small room just off the chamber, Jasmine sat alone. Her hand rested on a photo tucked in her folder. Her father, 62, a former pastor. He had marched with John Lewis in Selma. Died waiting for the insulin that Medicare wouldn't cover after a pharmaceutical immunity ruling from the court 2 years prior. "I promised you I'd speak," she whispered. Her aide knocked. "You okay?" She nodded. "I'm not here to be okay. I'm here to be clear." Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Supreme Court staff whispered too. Not one justice had responded publicly to Jasmine's claim. And Roberts? He was pacing, silent, a Bible in his hand but no words in his mouth. The nation was still watching, not for spectacle, but for someone, anyone, to answer her. What they didn't know was, Jasmine was just getting started, and the next name she would speak might shatter everything. The room reconvened at 2:14 p.m. Jasmine stood again, this time holding a binder. She walked slowly to the microphone, her heels echoing through the silence. "This is the case of Foster vs. United States. A 17-year-old sentenced to life without parole, tried as an adult. No legal guardian present, no lawyer until day 4. She turned the page. The judge who presided, later promoted to federal bench. By your recommendation, Chief Justice Roberts. Roberts blinked but again said nothing. That child was named Terrell Foster. He died last year, alone, in a prison cell in Indiana. His last letter went to me." She pulled it out. Her voice shook as she read. "Ms. Crockett, I don't think I'm getting out, but if you ever get the chance, please tell them I wasn't a monster. I was just a kid who needed someone to care." She stopped reading, folded the letter gently, then said something that cracked the room like thunder. "You can't claim justice while burying children." Even some court clerks looked down in shame, and for the first time, Robert's fingers trembled slightly. But Jasmine, she was unshaken, because she wasn't fighting for power. She was fighting against its silence. As Jasmine folded Tyrell Foster's final letter, a muffled cry echoed from the far corner of the public gallery. A woman stood, clutching a folder to her chest. She didn't shout. She didn't wave. She just whispered one word. "Thank you." Jasmine looked up and nodded gently, recognizing her from a past visit to her district office. Her name was Denise Ward. Her brother Marcus was wrongly convicted after a flawed search warrant led to a violent raid in 2018. Marcus had a seizure from police force. He now lived in a state-run facility, unable to walk or speak. The case reached the Supreme Court. They declined to hear it. Jasmine stepped toward the mic again. "Denise Ward is here today. Her brother Marcus is alive, but the justice system has turned its back on him." She paused. "Chief Justice, your refusal to entertain reform isn't neutrality. It's complicity." Gasps again. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She told Marcus's story without bitterness, only sorrow. And as she spoke, tears began slipping down the cheeks of even the most stoic staffers. This was no longer about headlines. It was about people, broken people, and a system that kept breaking them. As the room sat stunned, Jasmine calmly reached into her folder and held up a manila envelope. This was mailed to me anonymously 3 weeks ago. Chief Justice Roberts looked up, visibly tense for the first time. Inside were pages, printed internal memos from lower court judges. Some pages redacted, but others fully legible. They detailed lobbying efforts by outside interests, corporations, political donors, urging specific legal outcomes. Some cases later reached the Supreme Court, and the outcomes aligned. I verified this with 2 retired judges, Jasmine said quietly. They were afraid to come forward publicly. One called me crying, said he couldn't carry the secret to his grave. Now the silence wasn't heavy, it was sharp. Roberts opened his mouth, then closed it. Jasmine placed the envelope on the table before him. "I'm not accusing you of writing these," she said, "but I'm asking why you let the system around you rot while you sat still." The word cover-up wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. Even the camera zoomed closer. For once, the drama wasn't in the noise. It was in the stillness between one truth and the next. Somewhere in the back corner of the chamber, a young man, barely in his 20s, began shaking. He wore a badge, Judicial Clerk, Chambers of Justice, name redacted. His eyes were red, his hands clenched. Jasmine noticed him. She had been trained to spot quiet tremors, that slight breath of someone who wants to speak but is terrified to do so. "Sir," she said gently, "do you have something you wish to share?" The room turned. He looked like a deer in headlights. Tears formed. I do," gasps. A marshal stepped forward, but Roberts signaled for him to stop. The clerk rose. "My judge asked me to shred documents," he said. "Emails from a legal foundation that's not supposed to contact us. I didn't know what to do." His voice cracked. "But I kept them on a USB. I've been carrying it in my coat every day. I couldn't sleep." He reached into his pocket and held it out with a shaking hand. "I want to do what's right." Jasmine's voice broke, not from weakness, but awe. "You just did." And in that moment, the chamber was no longer a courtroom. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The chamber held its breath as the young clerk's hand trembled, offering the small black USB drive to a nearby congressional officer. Jasmine Crockett didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. "Secure the drive," she said softly. "Chain of custody matters." Every journalist in the room typed with shaking fingers. Viewers at home stared in silence. America hadn't seen anything like this since Watergate. Roberts sat still. Jasmine turned toward him. "This hearing isn't about humiliation. It's about healing. But you can't heal what you refuse to touch." She took a breath. "This drive contains names, communications, patterns, not just from fringe actors, but from people seated at the highest levels of our legal food chain. This is not rumor. It's record." She paused. "I don't want your resignation, Chief Justice. I want your reflection. And then, your reform." He didn't respond, but a flicker crossed his face, something between grief and fear. The USB, now in secure custody, would be examined by independent analysts. The truth was no longer hiding. And Jasmine Crockett? She just stood there. Not for applause, but for every voice the court had refused to hear. The next morning, millions had seen the footage. But Jasmine didn't care about trending. She cared about truth. The hearing resumed at 9 a.m. She stood again, this time holding a worn blue journal. "This belonged to Emery Hensley," she began. A slide was shown. A thin black boy, 14, standing in front of a closed-down public library in Mississippi. Emery was expelled for protesting the closure of his school's arts program. His mother filed suit after state funding mysteriously dried up. A chain reaction that began after a Supreme Court ruling gave states near total control over education equity. Jasmine opened the journal. Emory had written, "They took our school, but they can't take our minds. I want to be a lawyer someday. Maybe then they'll listen." The room grew still. He was hit by a car walking to the nearest school, 6 miles away. No buses, no crosswalks. Jasmine's voice cracked. He died holding this journal. People sobbed openly now. This court didn't kill Emory, but it made his death easier. Chief Justice Roberts looked down at his desk, and Jasmine looked up into the eyes of a broken nation. After the Emory testimony, the chamber recessed. But Jasmine didn't leave. She walked into a quiet anteroom, pulled out her phone, and tapped the last voicemail she'd ever received from a grieving father. It was from Jorge Ramirez, a former Marine and father of 3. His wife had died of cancer. His youngest son, Leo, had autism. Jorge fought for his son's right to specialized care, but his case was struck down after the Supreme Court limited disability protections in public schools. The message played, "Ms. Crockett, I know you get a lot of these. I tried. I tried everything. I begged the court, but now they say we have to move. My son can't even speak, but I heard him scream last night in his sleep. What do I do when there's nowhere left to go?" Jasmine never got the chance to respond. 2 weeks later, Jorge was found in his truck, engine off. A note on the dash read, "I'm sorry I wasn't enough." She played that message in the chamber and said, "His name is Jorge, his son is Leo, and this government failed them both." The room was no longer holding tears, it was drowning in them. When the hearing resumed after Jorge's voicemail was played, you could almost feel the soul of the room cracking. Chief Justice Roberts still hadn't spoken, but his knuckles were white, gripping the bench, not in control, in fear. Jasmine stood again, but this time she brought no props, no photos, no letters, only memory. "There's a ruling your court made," she said, "that allowed corporations to avoid liability for chemical dumping if they disclosed enough information. One of those companies? Holman Gas." She inhaled. "My uncle Gregory Lane lived downriver. He bathed in that water, fished from it. In 2021, he started coughing. In 2022, he couldn't walk, and by the time he got a diagnosis, it was stage 4. She closed her eyes. The court ruled Holman acted within bounds. She looked back up, and my uncle died in my arms, vomiting blood into a towel we'd already soaked twice. Gasps. A congressman excused himself, wiping his eyes. Jasmine didn't cry. She had already cried enough. "This isn't law. This is sanctioned suffering." Roberts looked down, staring into nothing. For the first time, the robe didn't seem like power. It looked like shame. As murmurs rippled through the chamber, an aide quietly approached Jasmine. They handed her a folded slip of paper. No envelope, no name, just a few lines scrawled in haste. "There is one more file. It was sealed without consent. 2003, Supreme Chambers. Look under CJR Private." Jasmine blinked. Her heart pounded. She turned the note over. Nothing else. She didn't know who sent it or why now. But deep down, she knew it mattered. Quickly, she signaled her chief of staff to investigate. Off the record, immediately. Then she returned to the microphone. "What if the highest court," she said slowly, "sealed something even Congress was never allowed to see?" The air tightened. She didn't accuse Roberts directly. She didn't need to. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Transparency doesn't mean showmanship. It means accountability. And if even a whisper of secrecy exists in a system built on public trust, then it is not law. It's theater. The audience was dead quiet, because for the first time, It felt like something far bigger than one man might be hiding behind that robe. And Jasmine, she was knocking at the door of something historic. Late that night, after cameras stopped rolling and headlines spread like wildfire, Jasmine's chief of staff returned to her hotel suite with a laptop and tears in his eyes. We found it. A sealed deposition, buried beneath layers of archived casework, not indexed publicly, filed under Chief Justice Roberts' personal clerical code, a 2003 confession from a then-young appellate judge. The document detailed improper influence from a political donor who promised support in exchange for specific case outcomes. The judge admitted to violating judicial ethics and claimed that instead of being disciplined, he was later promoted. Jasmine stared at the screen. The signature was clear. The promotion date matched, and the judge, he now sat on the Supreme Court. Jasmine whispered, "They knew." She didn't sleep that night. She barely breathed. She wrote her next statement by hand. It wasn't about scandal. It was about a choice. To finally, fully confront a broken system. The next morning, she returned to the chamber. The robe would tremble, and for the first time, it might fall. The morning session began with an uneasiness no one could name, only feel. Jasmine Crockett stood before the nation one last time. She didn't smile. She didn't pause. Her voice came low and heavy. "I have read every word of this document," she began, lifting the sealed file from the hidden archive. "And the man who confessed to unethical influence now sits in this room." Gasps rippled through the chamber. She didn't name him aloud. She let the facts speak louder than accusation. "I offer no judgment," she said. "Only exposure. And with exposure comes the one thing this system has feared most: reckoning." She passed the document to the oversight chair. "Mr. Chairman, I move that Congress formally investigate the Supreme Court for judicial misconduct, beginning with this file." And then, she turned to Roberts. "You had the power to stop this before it began." But silence was easier. Roberts lowered his gaze. His hands shook. For the first time in history, the Chief Justice of the United States said softly, "You're right. He didn't defend, didn't excuse." He folded his hands, robe still on, but no longer armor. And in that moment, justice trembled. Because the truth was finally spoken, by both sides. The hearing adjourned without applause, but with something far more powerful: understanding. As lawmakers and spectators rose from their seats, Jasmine Crockett didn't linger for cameras. She walked slowly, tears welled but unshed, past the Chief Justice, past the stunned senators, past the trembling clerk who had spoken up. And then something remarkable happened. People stood, one by one. No chants, no slogans, just stillness. They stood not for drama. They stood because something sacred had returned: accountability. Jasmine exited the chamber to find a hallway flooded with quiet faces, journalists with tears on their notepads, janitors in uniform whispering thank you, veterans in wheelchairs saluting her, teachers holding photos of children, survivors clutching legal filings, and in the very back, Leo Ramirez, the boy with autism, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big, holding his father's folded flag. She knelt. He reached out and hugged her. The cameras caught that, but not for ratings, for memory, because that hug said everything. That when you speak the truth, not for yourself but for others, change becomes possible. And Jasmine, she didn't just walk out of Congress, she walked into history. That night, Americans didn't watch football reruns or sitcoms. They watched Jasmine Crockett. Her speech was rebroadcast on every major network, every live stream, every classroom projector. People wept openly, across race, across party, across pain. And something rare happened. Chief Justice John Roberts held a press conference the next morning. With his voice trembling, he stood before the nation and removed his robe. "I have spent a lifetime in law," he said, "but I forgot that the law means nothing if it does not serve the people." He paused. "I accept Congress's call for reform, not as punishment, but as grace." Jasmine, watching quietly from her office, didn't smile. She bowed her head, because the work wasn't done, but something had shifted. Later that week, Emery Hensley's mother got a grant to reopen a community library in her son's name. Leo Ramirez received funding for therapy and care, and the USB whistleblower offered full protection. Change had begun, all because one woman stood and didn't flinch. If you felt this story deep in your heart, if you cried for Emery, Jorge, Leo, or the mother in the gallery, then drop a comment below that simply says, "Justice still matters." Like this video. Subscribe for more stories that challenge power, restore hope, and speak for the unheard. And share this with someone who believes silence is not strength. Because what Jasmine did, that's the voice we all need right now. Justice isn't untouchable.